How's it going, folks? Well, that's another challenge playthrough finished, another virtual trophy collected, and like the Thief playthrough, I couldn't help but spew my unsolicited opinions all throughout, so I figured I'd round out my thoughts to Mankind Divided here in this last video. Mankind Divided stacked up pretty well in my book. It released in 2016, a year that saw plenty of game releases, just not many game releases I was actually interested in. The setting and the subject matter are what appealed to me the most. Transhumanism as a concept isn't really explored too deeply here, but the game feels more like an aperitif. You play the game, whet your appetite, and then you go off and look into it yourself, do your own research, draw your own conclusions. The thing is, at times it's like the game is shying away from actually saying anything. It never really gets into a serious discussion about what it means to be human and how mechanical limbs and implants may affect society at large. It just sets up that sort of stuff as set dressing and leaves it at that. Take Aria Argento for example. Tragic Aria. She has a rare resistance to the drug neuropozyne that orgs need to take so their body doesn't reject their implants. As a result, she needs more than the average org, but there's a shortage of neuropozyne, which means she's constantly stressing out, which leads to her being cooked up at Task Force headquarters, twiddling her pneumatic thumbs. An interesting situation, right? But that's as far as it goes. The game just tells you this, and does nothing with it. This is what I meant when I said the game is just the aperitif. Of course, it doesn't exactly work to the game's credit. Contrast Aria's situation with protagonist Adam, who, by the power of the writing staff, doesn't need neuropozyne because his body doesn't reject orgs. That, in and of itself, is a pretty interesting mystery, but that never really gets explored either, and you're left with this drama vacuum. Adam's meme-tastic catchphrase, "I never asked for this," highlights just how much of a missed opportunity this medical miracle storyline is. He was literally a broken man rebuilt to be objectively better, and he gets that without the downsides of neuropozyne dependency. Adam also discovers at the start of the game that he has more orgs in his body than he originally thought, which opens up other avenues of discussion on the subject of transhumanism, with people's bodies essentially becoming commodities. But again, nothing comes of it. Adam doesn't even seem that bothered either way about them. Basically, shining a bigger spotlight on tragic characters like Aria would be the first step to addressing transhumanism a little more. Because from Adam's perspective, we're not seeing the hardships of living life augmented. It makes me wonder if an all-natural protagonist would work in a Deus Ex game. You'd start the game out unaugmented, but you'd have the choice to get implants as you played through. Getting an org could almost be framed like a moral choice. Getting the implants would make the game's scenarios easier, but it would be at the cost of what it means to be human, an individual. You may be derided by some characters for getting augmented, or celebrated by others for getting with the times. You may even have to become dependent on neuropozyne, do that whole role-playing malarkey these games are supposed to do. Maybe even have a little story influencing gameplay, I don't know. If Adam's catchphrase was, "I never asked for this," this new all-natural protagonist would have the catchphrase, "I did ask for this," and the consequences. That being said though, half the fun of playing Deus Ex is assuming the role of an augmented character and using all the tricks up your robo sleeves, and Mankind Divided achieves this. It's the typical handle a situation how you see fit kind of gameplay here, with simple objectives that just tell you what needs to be done and not how it's supposed to be done. But the augments add another layer to your approaches. It's not just about being an unseen ninja or a gun-toting commando. You can be the gun-toting commando that teleports between cover to outmaneuver your enemies, or the unseen ninja that stealths right up close to his enemies to blow them away with a typhoon blast they never saw coming. Not massive mix-ups on defined playstyles, more like fancy flourishes on top of them. There's a good amount of active augments on offer that are interesting to mess around with. What's more, they all have an impact on gameplay, with the majority of them pulling double duty in their application. I'd like to think I've shown this off in my playthrough, but just as an example, the Nanoblade Org can dispatch enemies from afar and pin them to walls, but it can also be used to create a distraction, or it can be charged up for an explosive shot. The Orgs all work well in tandem too, which made me realise why I like the gameplay so much here. It was doing what Ground Zeroes and the Phantom Pain did in the previous year. Mankind Divided has all these mechanics that work well on their own and work well together. Of course, the world design needs to be mentioned here too. Everything was built to accommodate experimentation with these orgs, but I'll get into talking about the level design later. Unfortunately, there's way too many passive orgs. Now, some of these orgs are actually useful and have an effect on gameplay. Orgs that increase jump height and help out in social interactions or increase energy or max health, I get. But orgs that speed up reload times or control recoil just seem like having an upgrade for the sake of another upgrade. They don't add new mechanics or possibilities, they only make the game slightly easier. Because of this, I found a lot of the upgrades had the problem of diminishing returns. As the game continued on, I'd see half the upgrade screen as a complete waste. My guns were already pretty accurate, so weapon handling orgs were useless. I was doing a stealth run, so upgrading health was useless because I wasn't getting into any fights. All I needed were the core stealth and movement orgs. But, let's take a step back here. The point I'm making now isn't even a negative one really. It shows the true diversity in character builds that can be achieved. It's a stark improvement on the org opportunities that were on offer in Human Revolution, where every player would have had pretty much the same character build by the end. The experimental orgs seem to be a testament to this, and are Mankind Divided's crowning feature. They were an interesting addition to gameplay. These were the game changers, overpowered abilities that cost you the use of another org, helping out towards diversifying player growth and interaction. Too bad there's only a handful of them, and some of them all follow the same idea of shoot a thing from your arm. So gameplay on the whole is pretty good. The only criticism I have really is that it can feel a little modal. When Adam is wearing his coat, you're most likely to be in a setting where you'll be walking and talking, rather than sneaking and shooting. But as soon as Adam dons his combat gear, you know things are about to go down. A good example of this happening at the worst possible time is when you first enter Ark territory. Chicane says this.
Chicane, I'm in Ark territory now. That flyby show you anything?
First section seems to be a mass storage area. View ahead looks like Ark has repurposed it for living quarters. Or barracks, maybe.
Those two things have very different connotations, Chicane. Which is it?
Well, everyone in front of you is armed, so I'll let you decide.
Right.
Any ambiguity this exchange is supposed to create is immediately destroyed when you realise Adam has already changed into his sneaking action attire at this point, and seeing as sneaking makes up the lion's share of the game, it's no surprise what you're actually walking into. So even though Chicane said what he said, you know that you're in an action situation. But besides that, the gameplay is solid, but for me, the real star of the show here really was the level design. Earlier on in the series, I said this phrase, mise en scène, when talking about the sandbox of Prague and how much I liked it. I want to apologise for bringing it up again. I'm not trying to sound superior or educated or anything like that, but I can't find any other way to get my feelings for this across. For those not in the know, mise en scène is essentially a fancy way of addressing the scene or setting in its entirety. In cinema, it's not just about the props in the scene, but the lighting, the camera angles, even the actors in the scene, what they are wearing and their body language. This same idea can be carried over into gaming. If you take a walk through the streets of Prague, you'll see why I liked it so much. In the day, the music is subdued, almost like it's a calm before a storm. There's a heavy police presence, they act hostile, and definitely make themselves known to the public. You occasionally overhear a news broadcast or some conversation between homeless people or a passerby to give it that lived-in feel. You'll come across the political flourishes dotted around the city, and even though some of them come across a little ham-fisted, they all add to the atmosphere. Then, when the curfew hits later in the story, the mood changes completely. The heavy rain has this oppressive feel to it, and almost drowns out the cries of pedestrians that have been rounded up and arrested. They all go hand in hand with this increased police presence, now actively hostile, which just amplifies this feeling of dread. You're sneaking through streets you were once free to walk through. Prague becomes a level in its own right, with minimal changes to its layout. The music is moody, but really gets pumping when combat breaks out. Gotham City gets an honourable mention as well. During the playthrough I said it was a pity you only get to go there once, because it was easily one of the most memorable locations in terms of visual design. I don't want to talk about just the visuals though, as it's not all good news for level design. Even though mechanics are in place for you to tackle a situation however you see fit, the missions can be a little bit railroady at times. I noticed for a few of the game scenarios, you're forced to pass through certain bottlenecks. Think of it like this. The levels are designed like having 2 or 3 wide open fields connected end on end by a narrow corridor. The fields offer great freedom, but to get to the next field you're going to have to pass through the same particular point across all of your playthroughs. These connecting corridors are short though, and nothing of note occurs in them. The majority of gameplay is spent in these fields. I wonder if they were there to mask loading times or something. This sort of design is in keeping with what I said during the playthrough though. Massive open worlds wouldn't work to Deus Ex's credit, so having these semi-open sandboxes is a nice compromise. These sandboxes have plenty to do in them as well. In my first playthrough, I was walking into loads of side quests, mostly by simply progressing through the main story. But there were some I missed, like the mini quest where you come across some crazed policeman out for your blood, or the set of quests where you become an odd job man for the mob. One questline that really stood out to me was the murder mystery quests. It's a truly unique side quest because it doesn't revolve around combat or sneaking. It wasn't just the intrigue either. This quest is so good because it doesn't use any special mechanics or set pieces. It's all done with what you already have, your skills and your augs. They're put to the test into actually investigating a murder. You interview witnesses, chase up suspects, and discover clues scattered all over the city. There's even parts where a little lateral thinking comes into it. It felt so satisfying to play and solve, and none of it feels out of place either. The main story could have done with a little bit of this investigation gameplay. As is, the story just unfolds in front of you with no investigation on the player's part whatsoever. Unfortunately, even the quests are subject to the same bottlenecking problem as the level design. On my first playthrough, I actually worked out who the murderer was organically during the course of my own investigation. Of course, because I hadn't hit the right point in the story, I couldn't do anything about it. Going off that, Mankind Divided seems to have a few writing niggles. Now look, I'm no expert writer or literary critic, but some of the stuff I noticed characters say made no sense when I stopped to examine it. Here's what I'm talking about. Partway through the game, when confronting Rucker in Ark territory, Adam says this.
The hatred goes both ways. Innocent people died in that bombing today. And I didn't see you on television condemning that injustice.
They're talking about the train station bombing at the start of the game, but immediately after the bombing, we have a 30-hour time skip. Not only this, but when you leave your apartment after that time skip, Cola says this.
Something wrong?
There are some guys in my bookshop. Pissed off the valley gangster-looking guys. So, unless you want bloodshed the day after a terror attack...
The front door isn't the most peaceful option. I got it.
So either Adam travelled back in time, or the writers weren't really paying attention to their own writing. Another example of this happening is when Adam uses the NSN to listen to his boss's conversation. Afterward, Adam meets up with his hacker pal Janus to talk about what was heard. Adam suggests they go public with the information, but Janus says this.
Doesn't mean we can't arrest both of them for conspiracy to commit murder. We heard Paige give the order to kill Rucker.
In a recorded conversation that you obtained illegally. It's fruit from the poisonous tree, Mr. Jensen. It won't stand up in court.
Which is correct. The problem is, immediately after saying that, Janus recommends we do this.
VersaLife has an account at the Palisade Property Bank. If you can get to their data vault, we may find some of the answers we're looking for.
You're telling me to break into a bank?
But wouldn't breaking into a private vault be the same, if not worse? If the recording was fruit from the poisonous tree, breaking into a private vault would be like taking the whole poisonous farm. But why am I bringing up this kind of pedantic nitpicking? Well, isn't Deus Ex one of those titles that are held to a higher standard of storytelling? I've got Kotaku, of all places, on the back of the box telling me this game is intelligent and stylish, but with basic mistakes like this, and with transhumanism not really being explored too deeply, I sort of have to ask if these game journalists even paid attention. Is this all really as intelligent as these journalists are telling me? The last thing I want to talk about is the ending and the shaky future of Deus Ex. Before we even had Mankind Divided in our hands, it was fighting an uphill battle for our approval, what with the travesty that was augment your pre-order, and the inclusion of microtransactions. The pre-order nonsense was scrapped, but the microtransactions unfortunately remained. When it finally released, it became apparent that Mankind Divided was literally divided up, with an ending so sudden it leaves you speechless for all the wrong reasons. It also leaves plenty of plot lines unresolved. The central story of the Golden Mask mercenaries is wrapped up, but the events that link Human Revolution to this game are never addressed. They certainly are hinted at though, and it seems the plan was to find out more in the next game. At least I hope that was the plan. But even that is looking unlikely. Mankind Divided didn't sell well, I'm afraid. Or maybe it didn't live up to Square Enix's ridiculous standards. So here we are. At time of writing, we're left with a cliffhanger ending that wasn't even meant to be an ending, with no payoff in sight. It makes me wonder if sales were affected by those grimy business practices this industry perpetuates. I know hindsight is 2020, but if the pre-order plan never existed and the microtransactions weren't present, or at least not an obvious and cynical cash grab, maybe Mankind Divided would have been received better. It may have even sold better. There's love and care in this game. A lot of thought went into crafting it. But it's easy to focus on negatives, isn't it? Why talk about Mankind Divided's great gameplay and detailed world when you can just have a good moan about the awful pre-order plan it was associated with that one time? Thank you very much for watching.